Hi everyone, and welcome to Lazy Lion. If you've watched some of our other videos, you may have already heard us mention our next anime review entry, especially if you've seen our Cowboy Bebop or Great Pretender videos. Care to hazard a guess? Oh, wait, it's in the title. Well, that's right. We'll be covering Lupin the Third, and more specifically, the film Lupin the Third, The Castle of Cagliostro. Now usually, when covering older anime, we worry that our nostalgia for these titles may be rose-tinting our analyses. I mean, the nostalgia has pretty much become a catchphrase here at Lazy Lion. But despite The Castle of Cagliostro originally coming out in 1979 in Japan, and then again in 1991 in North America, we actually only saw it recently after it became available over on Netflix. And for a movie that came out about 4 decades ago, it surprisingly aged pretty darn well. We can't exactly say the same for the manga or some of the earlier TV animated series, but we'll come back to that later. What you need to know right now is that if you like those classic action-adventure heist films with a dash of heroics and comedy, then you're bound to enjoy this gem of a movie. The story starts off with Lupin the Third, a gentleman thief and master of disguise, and his partner in crime, Jigen, as they make their escape from a casino in Monte Carlo after just having robbed it. Things take a turn when, on closer inspection of their loot, Lupin quickly realizes that they're actually the ones who've been swindled, and that all the banknotes are in fact fake. Incredibly realistic fakes, but fakes nonetheless. While some would be disheartened after seeing all their hard work go down the drain, Lupin is instead elated to have discovered an even more ludicrous target than the last. He's going to steal the actual printing plates. I mean, why go to the trouble of stealing money if you can just print your own, right? Mind you, one could argue that if the fake banknotes were so realistic that only a professional would be able to tell the difference, then wouldn't they still have been able to use the fakes? Probably. But where's the fun in that? This means then that their goal isn't necessarily to get wealthy, but instead to chase after the thrill of pulling off the greatest heist. And when the duo find out that the plates are being guarded somewhere within the castle walls of the Count of Cagliostro, they may have just run into their most impossible challenge yet. Excellent. Time to call for backup. Just one more problem. They also happen to arrive just as the country is getting ready to celebrate the Count's future wedding. Even under normal circumstances, getting into the castle would be difficult. We're talking moats, lasers, trapdoors, guards, lots of guards, and even a group of trained ninja assassins. Yep, those two. But with the wedding about to take place, the country is not only on lockdown, but security in the castle has been increased tenfold. The only thing being more heavily guarded than the plates is the bride, the young and beautiful Princess Clarice, who's the rightful heir to the throne of Cagliostro, and who's being forced into a political marriage with the Count against her will. Money and power? Seems the Count is getting pretty greedy. Well, Lupin can't let him keep all this treasure to himself, now can he? But will he decide to be a gentleman and save the girl? Or will he be a thief and get the plates? Or will he perhaps decide to free both from the Count's clutches? We're not telling. You'll just have to watch the film to find out. Oh, by the way, did we mention this was Hayao Miyazaki's directorial film debut? What? We didn't? For shame! More on that soon. For now, let's take a quick detour to the beginning of Lupin's long line of escapades and look at the source material for the film and franchise. The popular Lupin the Third franchise first started out as a manga, which was created by Kazuhiko Kato, better known by his pen name Monkey Punch. The manga, simply titled Lupin the Third, made its first appearance in the seinen magazine Weekly Manga Action in 1967. At first, the series was only scheduled to run for 3 months, but soon gained so much interest that it continued from 1967 to 1969, producing up to 14 volumes. Now, we mentioned the fact that it was published in a seinen magazine, just to make clear that this material was always meant for a more mature and male audience. When creating the series, Kato was both heavily inspired by the novels of the gentleman thief Arsène Lupin by the French author Maurice Leblanc, and by the British author Ian Fleming's James Bond spy series. After combining various elements from both, Kato created a story that was jam-packed with action, violence, and sex, as well as a lot of dark humor. A stark contrast to its more tame and family-friendly anime adaptations, which would come later. So how did we get from the manga to the film The Castle of Cagliostro? Well, as we were saying earlier, The Castle of Cagliostro was Hayao Miyazaki's first shot at directing a theatrical film, which he did with the backing of TMS Entertainment. Funny story, Miyazaki was actually the one who called them and told them that they should give him a shot at directing the film. Luckily, the head animator for the project, Yasuo Otsuka, was familiar with his work and agreed that he might be the best person suited for the job, saying that if Miyazaki came on board, this couldn't fail to be an entertaining anime. So in the end, we'd say it all worked out. Interestingly, it wasn't the first time Miyazaki was attached to a Lupin project, nor would it be the last. When the Lupin manga series finally got its TV debut in 1971 as Lupin the Third Part 1, well, to be honest, it didn't do very well. It was more mature than other shows out there at the time, and quite frankly, Lupin and the rest of the cast just weren't that likable. So the studio asked then-director Masaaki Osumi to make some changes. When he refused, stating that the show should remain true to the source material, the studio called in Hayao Miyazaki and future fellow Ghibli co-founder Isao Takahata to direct the rest of the series. Ouch. And while the first season never really became popular, it was due to Miyazaki and Takahata that Lupin has continued to come across as more silly and comedic. And it's also possibly due to this experience that Miyazaki decided to portray Lupin in The Castle of Cagliostro not as a shallow, wealthy playboy who stole things simply to stave off boredom like in the manga, but instead wanted Lupin to have more depth, more of a raison d'être. Not all fans were happy with this, of course, but Miyazaki believed that the way to make Lupin a success was to make him more relatable and sincere. He needed the audience to connect with the characters. And to do that, he needed to give them heart, something that has brought Miyazaki much success in his later films. And this is also probably why Cagliostro is still considered the best Lupin adaptation, as well as an anime classic. An anime classic we have to point out that only took 7.5 months to complete, with only 5 of those months being the actual production of the animation, which is mind-boggling. Now, even though Miyazaki may have changed certain characteristics of the main cast, he and the production team were still inspired by the original source material, and especially the literature that first inspired Kazuhiko Kato when creating the Lupin the Third manga. The first indication of this would be the title of the film, The Castle of Cagliostro, which actually comes from Maurice Leblanc's Arsène Lupin novel, Countess Cagliostro. We see further influences from Leblanc's work, such as plot elements from his novel The Green-Eyed Lady, to La Justice d'Arsène Lupin, written by Boileau-Narcejac, a writing duo who took over the Arsène Lupin series in the 1970s. Miyazaki was also influenced by Grimaud's film The Shepherdess and the Chimney Sweep. He and the production team would also be inspired by real-world events, such as the wedding of the Prince of Monaco Rainier III to the American actress Grace Kelly. And it seems that Cagliostro also took some cues from the last film Grace Kelly ever starred in before her marriage, To Catch a Thief. The car chase through the cliffside streets of the French Riviera definitely reminded us of Cagliostro's own iconic car chase. They both even had a car filled to the brim with goons. And speaking of cars, the production team decided to make another change to the Lupin the Third franchise. by adding a personal tribute to the head animator Yasuo Otsuka. No longer would Lupin drive a Mercedes-Benz SSK, which we incidentally learned was Hitler's favorite car. No. Now Lupin would drive around in a yellow Fiat 500, the same car that Otsuka drove. Which, if you're going to be partaking in car chases along narrow, winding European Mediterranean streets, let's be honest, the Fiat is probably the way to go. This compact and unpretentious Italian car also seemed to fit much better with Miyazaki's new direction for Lupin's character. The humble and empty-handed Lupin also provided a nice contrast to the opulent wealth and majesty of the Count and his castle. A classic David and Goliath story, making Lupin's imminent triumph over the Count that much sweeter. And speaking of sweet, this wouldn't have felt like a true Lupin the Third adaptation without the music of Yuji Ono, who over the years has been instrumental in providing most of the music for the Lupin series from TV to film. The soundtrack offers a nice blend of romance and orchestral music along with some lively jazz pockets, driving home again that there's much more to Lupin than just getting rich. If you're familiar with Miyazaki's work, you'll probably already be aware of the fact that he likes to look to Europe for inspiration, and that he has a particular fondness for the Mediterranean Riviera. We see this in Cagliostro, and then again in some of his Ghibli films like Porco Rosso, for example. Actually, if we look just at Miyazaki's films from his time at Ghibli, you'll notice that at least half of the projects he's worked on, either as director or screenwriter, seem to either take place somewhere directly in Europe or have a character who travels there. Many of you may have also noticed that recent anime has been much more European-inspired as of late. From the look of the architecture or the food or art, or even from the character names. Now, this is not exactly something new, but because the production of anime has been quickly ramping up over the last decades, with the last 10 years releasing 1,897 anime series and films, we seem to come across it much more often, especially when it comes to the fantasy and isekai genres. And this obsession with Europe isn't just found in anime, but within everyday life in Japan. We see it in fashion, in architecture, in food, etc. So why is this? Why is Japan so obsessed with Europe? Some would argue that the answer is simply because the East finds Europe just as mysterious and fantastical as the West finds Asia. And on some level, we believe that this is true, especially when it comes to the aforementioned genres of fantasy and isekai. But we also think there's much more to it than just that. To explain this better, we'll have to take a quick look back into the history of Japan. Now, even though Japan had come into contact with Europeans throughout its history, it wasn't until it was forced out of its national seclusion by the Americans and pressured into opening back up its ports for trade with the rest of the world in 1854 that Japan had felt to some extent that the West was much more technologically advanced than itself. People soon became enamored by all the new things coming in from Europe. This helped build an idealized version of what people thought those countries were like. So with pop culture, these fascinations grew. But then the feeling of being technologically inferior came crashing in again during World War II. Because of this, Japan decided to focus its efforts on advancing their own technology to ensure they would never again be at such a disadvantage to the technology of other countries. This led the Japanese to almost exclusively study what America was doing in order to push themselves ahead. And after the war, Japan underwent a massive and rapid modernization. To some, this was just too sudden, and they felt that they no longer recognized the country they grew up in. As Japan's main focus was on the constant and ever-evolving innovative ways of America, some slowly began to think of Europe as a place of peace and tradition, where everything stays exactly the same and never changes. Many had this idea of Europeans spending their days just all sitting around in cafes discussing philosophy and art while sipping on espressos and listening to some violinist play on the corner outside. It also didn't help that regular citizens of Japan couldn't travel abroad by plane and see these places for themselves. The only ones able to do so were government officials representing the country, meaning that they were also shown a very different Europe to the norm, mainly attending upscale functions and eating at high-class restaurants. And when these officials came back, they would share these stories about how grand all things European are, which only made the romantic notion of Europe spread even further into the consciousness of the Japanese, and people became even more obsessed with it. Europe soon became synonymous with wealth and class. So when the average public could finally fly internationally in the 1960s, many chose to travel to Europe. There was just one itsy-bitsy tiny little insignificant problem with that, which was, well, that their European paradise didn't exist, and it still doesn't. Turns out, Europe was modernizing just like the rest of the world. So you can imagine the shock many Japanese people felt when they traveled to these idealized cities such as London, Rome, Paris, Madrid, only to find them completely different from what they expected. Many travelers experience such a profound disappointment that they end up suffering from a psychological condition known as Paris syndrome. This manifests itself in symptoms like crippling anxiety, extreme heart palpitations, profuse sweating, vomiting, dizziness, even hallucinations. Sounds like a pretty normal Friday to me. This hasn't seemed to deter the Japanese from continuing to visit these places though, nor still idealizing them. Being able to visit Europe was and is expensive, and also became a status symbol to lord over your neighbors. Meaning that we'll probably continue to see European-inspired anime in the future. So why not just embrace it by watching one of the best examples of this rose-tinted European paradise phenomenon, and check out the Castle of Cagliostro. Not only is it a great place to start if you're new to the Lupin the Third franchise, but we'd also highly recommend watching it if you're a fan of Hayao Miyazaki's work over at Ghibli, since it definitely has Miyazaki's stamp all over it. Which is no surprise since he did everything from the directing, to the writing, to the storyboarding, to designing. I mean, from the moment the opening credits start, it's undeniably a Miyazaki film. There are also a lot of ideas and visuals from Cagliostro that show up in his later films, like Nazca the Valley of the Wind, or Howl's Moving Castle, or even Castle in the Sky. So it's a great film to watch if you admire Miyazaki's storytelling. Consider it the prequel to his Ghibli creations. On that note, this will probably be our only review of a Miyazaki film, since do we really need to sell you on his Ghibli movies? I don't know. You can let us know in the comments below if that would be something that would interest you. Also, feel free to let us know which of his films or any other Ghibli films is your favorite. Personally, we have a triple tie between Princess Mononoke, My Neighbor Totoro, and Spirited Away. If you guys are curious, we do have some bonus content over on our blog. Now, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to click that like button to let us know, and you can also hit that subscribe button for more videos like this. Thanks for watching. Stay obsessed.